8 months to go until the November election, but it will feel much, much longer. And a rematch between President Biden and former President Donald Trump is all but certain. New polling, though, is setting off alarm bells at the White House, I am sure. Okay, so look, can we see the numbers here? Do we have the magic full screens at this point? Yes. Okay, so this is what ruined everybody's Saturday who's a Democrat in Washington, D.C. The very good, people are saying it's one of the best, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump head-to-head poll, Trump up by 5. That's outside the margin of error. And oof. So why is that? Why is Joe Biden doing so poorly?
Meanwhile,
in the Michigan primary, oh yes, I read about this, will protest votes over Biden's policy in Gaza cost him the election in the fall. If people don't know what we're talking about, Michigan just had a primary. Michigan has a large Muslim population. They're not too thrilled that Joe Biden is supporting Israel in its war. And so 100,000 people voted uncommitted. These are Democratic voters who apparently seem to be saying we are threatening to support Trump, a known lover of Muslims. But this is a wedge issue in the Democratic Party. The young people, the kids, and Muslim voters like this don't want him supporting Israel. Many other people do. What are your thoughts?
I think that the media really, really wants to put this narrative out there that Biden is going to lose Michigan over Gaza, when the truth is he's going to lose Michigan over 600,000 auto workers, because his EV market was extremely punishing to auto workers. And like we said earlier, there's been this big realignment where working class Americans are very, very, very much on the Trump train, people who used to be Democrats and used to vote for Democrats. And rather than admit that, this outrage that Democrats lost the working class vote and try to figure out how we can appeal to them again, they're looking for excuses and other things to blame, like, oh, this war in Gaza, or they'll call them deplorables, or they'll call them racists, because they don't want to admit that Trump has picked up a lot of the policies that used to be Democratic policies in the 90s, like controlling the border, for example. The idea that an open border and mass migration is extremely punishing to the working class. It drives down their wages. It's class warfare against the working class. It is an upward transfer of wealth from the working class, who end up competing with immigrants, to the elites who end up employing them, and now they can employ cheap immigrants instead of having to pay working class Americans a living wage. Thanks, guys.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I'm sure they did not want to hear that, which is the truth. The truth about why the Biden administration is losing support from Democrats. And some of these Democrats are voting for Trump. And instead of acknowledging the real issues and policies that are making people support Trump over Biden, no. You're just a racist, sexist, homophobic bigot. Again, what she said on Bill Maher's show is the truth. It is a reality check for Democrats and liberals like Bill Maher, who simply want to believe that Trump's popularity is a result of bigotry and hate, and not because of cuckoo for Cocoa Puff Democrat policies that have hurt average, everyday working class Americans. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I do believe, or I hope, that the election comes down to that, right? I hope it comes down to working class Americans who are fed up with Democrat policies that are hurting them and deciding to go in a direction that is going to be best for the country, especially when we're talking about economically. When we're talking about foreign policy, we're talking about not getting involved in these wars, we're talking about securing the border, we're talking about getting tough on crime. I am hoping that the 2024 election is a referendum on bringing common sense back to this country. That's what it comes down to. Okay, quite honestly, guys, if Trump doesn't win in 2024, I'm not sure if there's much hope left, right? I think that the country ultimately will officially be in a free fall, and I don't really have much hope left, right? So with that being said, we do have some good news, because as I predicted, Trump's lead over Biden is expanding, okay? It is expanding because there were 3 polls that came out from the mainstream liberal media showing that Trump's lead over Biden is getting stronger, okay? And this is something that I said would happen as we get closer to the general election, because ultimately the attacks from the mainstream liberal media aren't working, okay? People are fed up with Joe Biden's economy. They're fed up with being lied to about what's happening at the border. And as a result, People are coming around to supporting Trump. Again, for the first time ever, most people in this country believe that we should actually have a wall, right? We should have a wall at the border to try to stop illegals from coming into the country. Again, I'm saying 2024 is going to be a referendum on bringing common sense back to this country, okay? That's ultimately what it's going to be about. So with that being said, we have to react to one of the mainstream liberal media polls, the CBS News poll, that found that Trump, again, is expanding his lead over Joe Biden to the point where it's outside of the margin of error. And again, this is a big deal because if you guys all understand how the Electoral College works, Republicans tend to have a hard time winning the popular vote, right? They don't necessarily need the popular vote in order to win, but if a Republican does get the popular vote, it is almost guaranteed. It's almost guaranteed that a Republican will win. Okay, so that being said, things are looking very good for President Trump going into the general election. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Important week in the 2024 election in which both President Biden and former President Trump are expected to win hundreds of delegates in Super Tuesday contests in more than 15 states. On Thursday, Mr. Biden will make his State of the Union address. Our CBS News poll out this morning shows the former president with a 4-point edge over the current president among likely voters nationwide.
Again, this is important because the margin of error is 3.5 points. Okay, so this is outside of the margin of error. This is a strong poll. Okay, this is a strong poll for Trump here. Okay, and I know some of you guys are probably in disbelief that it's even this close. I get it. I understand, right? But yeah, this is a strong poll for Trump.
That is Trump's largest general election lead yet in our surveys this cycle. Joining us now is our Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, good to have you here.
Good morning.
So our polling has shown perceptions of the economy have been improving. So why isn't that helping Joe Biden?
Because it's the comparison that people are making between how they rate the economy today and what they remember it being during the Trump years. And it's the remembering that's the key word there. I specifically asked, how do you remember it? And 2/3 of voters say they remember it being good, which is also interesting because if you go back and look at the polling from that time, people did in fact rate it good in 2018, 2019, but then views of the economy cratered after the pandemic and the shutdowns.
Well, again, that ain't really got much to do with Trump in the sense that, yes, the world decided to shut down. The shutdown in the United States wasn't just a decision from Trump. It came from the government as a whole, okay? And ultimately, at the end of the day, before the pandemic, if you take out what happened before the pandemic, okay, if you give Trump a mulligan on the pandemic, which I think that he should get, right? Because at the end of the day, this is how I like to judge, right? It's hard to say what somebody should or should not do in the moment, right? Especially when you have a virus that at the time everybody thought was worse than it actually turned out to be. How you judge is how you react once the facts and data comes out, right? When the facts and data started to come out, it was clear that Trump wanted to open back up the economy. He wanted to open back up schools, okay, that we probably needed to stop spending so much money. And there's no doubt in my mind that had Trump stayed in office after the 2020 election going into 2021, another term, and Republicans had won the Senate, things would not have happened the way that it happened when Joe Biden got in office, okay? Because Democrats did another stimulus package that we didn't need. We know for a fact Mitch McConnell was not on board with that, okay? Mitch McConnell was definitely not on board with another stimulus package. So I don't think we would have poured trillions of more dollars into the economy. I think that Republicans would have forced people to go back to work. At that point, we did have the vaccines come out, which I know people have their opinions about the vaccines and stuff like that. But that would have been the catalyst, right? I mean, we have to admit, regardless of what people think about the vaccines, the criticisms of the vaccines were the catalyst to motivate people to open up the economy and to feel comfortable going back to normal, right? So I think that under those circumstances, I think we would have went back to normal faster. I don't think we'd be dealing with the same situation that we're dealing with right now if Republicans had won the Senate and Trump was still in office. Okay, I think that it would have been better. I'm not saying we wouldn't have dealt with some inflation. I think you're definitely going to get some inflation with all the spending, with halting the economy, halting people going back to work. I don't think it would have been as bad as it is right now. Okay. And I think the reason why it's as bad as it is right now is because Democrats decided to pour fuel on the fire of, the economy being too overheated. Okay. But because we already had numbers suggesting that the 2021 economy was going to be good, Democrats said, no, we're going to do our own stimulus package, right? We want to give people stimulus checks and stuff like that. They decided to do that. They decided to keep the economy shut down for much longer than it needed to be shut down. They decided to close schools and things like that for much longer than they needed to be closed, despite the facts and data showing that, hey, this virus is not as bad as we thought. We can go ahead and start to get back to normal. Democrats decided not to do that. And I think that made it worse than it otherwise would have been. That's just my opinion. But regardless of all that, the American people knew that despite the narrative from the mainstream liberal media, that the economy was great under Trump. It's one of the best economies that we've had in a long, long, long time. Okay. And people remember that. And ultimately, they know that, hey, you know what? If we get this man back in the office, there's a chance that hopefully we go back to that. And that's ultimately what people want, because we're not used to this type of hyperinflation that we've seen under the Biden administration, right? The American people have not lived through that before, okay? At least not since the 70s and the 80s. We haven't seen this type of inflation. So seeing it for the first time, it's going to take a while for the American people to get used to these higher prices. And I think that's what's actually really hurting Biden the most, is the fact that inflation rose so fast and so quickly. People weren't used to paying such higher prices for the basic goods and essentials, and gaslighting them and telling them that the economy is good when, objectively speaking, you're poor. It just doesn't make sense. And it probably leaves a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths.
Doesn't seem like they're remembering that part of it here. But that's the reality today. So it's that comparison that isn't holding up for the White House, number one. And then number two, you push that forward and ask, well, whose policies might make prices go down? And there's a lot of Republicans who think that prices will go down if Donald Trump gets elected. But what's troubling for Joe Biden is that you still get him associated with price increases, because a lot of people think that prices would continue to go up under his policies.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not necessarily sure we're going to get deflation across the board if Trump is elected. I mean, that could signal a recession. Okay, and that's not what we want. But what you hope happens is that the rate of inflation comes to a grinding halt. Okay, along with an expanding of the economy. Okay, hopefully we can get policies in place that are very pro fossil fuels, pro-growth, more deregulation in order to get the economy growing and the economy expanding. That's essentially what the Trump administration did in order to get the economy where it was when he was in office. And maybe that can lower the cost of goods and services associated with some sectors of the economy, along with an expansion in purchasing power. That is what you hope for, okay, under a second Trump administration.
That's why.
Memory is an interesting thing, isn't it? Anthony, the campaign is leaning heavily into issues of democracy, access to voting, even calling Donald Trump a threat to democracy itself. Why isn't that helping the Biden campaign?
Well, because it's bullshit. And everybody knows it's bullshit if you just pay attention to the Biden administration. They don't believe in democracy. Again, the democracy talking point is very played out. And when people can see that within the Democrat Party, they don't even believe in democracy, they're trying to take out a political opponent, they're trying to rig the 2024 election. When people can see that is out in the open, it's hard for you to run on democracy when your party isn't democratic, right? So I think that talking point is very played out, and it doesn't really have that much of effect on people outside of Blue Anon.
Well, that's in the electorate's mind, but it's kind of priced in at this point in this sense. You get a majority of Americans that do think that the former president tried to stay in office past his constitutional term. The ones who think that his approach to that was illegal, which is just under half, are in fact voting for Joe Biden.
Yeah, but let's go back here. Let's go back. Okay. After the 2020 election, Trump did not plan to stay in office. Okay. Or stay in office by legal means. So you have about 56% of voters that think that Trump either planned to stay in office by legal means or did not plan to stay in office, which would indicate that a majority of Americans didn't really see a problem with what Trump did or don't have that much issues with what Trump did after the 2020 election. That's the actual real story here. Okay, that explains why the so-called democracy talking point isn't working.
Approach to that was illegal, which is just under half, are in fact voting for Joe Biden. But everybody else, the ones who think he was following constitutional processes or wasn't planning to stay, they're all ready to return Donald Trump to office. So that split in many ways kind of defines not just the race, but also where we are as a country right now. Maybe it moves a little bit as the trials go forward. Maybe if there's a conviction, certainly something to watch. But net, you get about an even split between Biden and Trump right now on who would do best at keeping democracy safe.
Which again tells you everything you need to know about how this talking point is just not working, right? It's just not working at all.
Democrats are putting reproductive rights front and center in this campaign, betting that it will drive turnout among voters across party lines who are just concerned about this issue. Is that a safe bet?
So there is a majority that feels that the overturn of Roe v. Wade was bad for the country. But what's interesting to me is this difference between then who blames Donald Trump for that, which is what the Biden campaign is trying to do. And that's a smaller number. But then coming even more immediately, the recent IVF ruling, we asked about that. And in fact, a large majority thinks that IVF should be legal. So again, this issue is going to stay top of mind and certainly is going to be a factor, I think.
Well, I think this issue is probably the only issue that Democrats can win on. I think that's what they're banking on, because even the democracy talking point, as you can see, is not working. So the only thing they have left is the single young thotty vote, right? The 304s of America, okay, single women who overwhelmingly vote Democrat. Yeah, they're going to try to play up this issue in order to get them out to vote, right? That's really their only hope. Now, again, what you can see here is that despite some of the talking points from the left, Trump is not really taking too much heat for overturning Roe v. Wade in the sense that people are blaming him per se. So hopefully it won't really be used against him too much. It won't really hurt him too much going into general. But regardless, I think that Republicans overall have to really get this issue right. They have to definitely understand the current culture in this country and try to frame the conversation around this issue in a way that's not going to motivate people to vote against Republicans. And I think the IVF thing is one of these kind of issues that is an unfortunate conversation that Republicans have been dragged into, but it's probably best to simply leave it alone, right? Don't engage in the argument because it's not worth it, right? It's just not worth it. That type of stuff will lose you elections. And I think Republicans got to realize that, hey, maybe we just shouldn't engage in this, right? We should just, stay away from it, right? Just stay away from these topics, okay? Because these are not winning topics for Republicans.
Interesting, because in Alabama, where that ruling happened 2 weeks ago, they are working very swiftly to protect it within the state legislature, and the governor are expected to look at some of those bills this week. So it shows how resonant that one issue is. But Anthony, this is going to be such a key week. We have Super Tuesday upon us. Has Biden been able to consolidate the base of his party, the people who are committed to coming out as Democrats?
Well, in many ways, no, not yet. And that's really important for two things. One is that a lot of the measures I've been describing here for Joe Biden are driven in part by the fact that Democrats are more critical of him and more critical of their president than Republicans are of Donald Trump.
Is that always the case?
Well, in some ways, that's kind of typical for Democrats, right? It's often a more transactional approach, often a little more criticism in there, whereas Republicans, and they've told us, they really value loyalty to Donald Trump. So some of that...
Well, we understand what we got under Trump, right? We understand that the Trump economy was great, okay? And essentially, we don't have a real reason to be upset with Trump. But Democrats do have a real reason to be upset with Biden, because look what they got under Biden. Disaster. They got disaster. Now, don't get me wrong. A lot of them voted for it, right? They know damn well that Biden was soft on borders. Biden was telling illegals to come into the country when he was running a Democrat primary. But it just so happens that the only way to red pill Democrats is to give them what they want. So now that they have what they wanted, what they voted for, now they realize, oh, well, we don't like this, right? So that's what's happening to Biden.
Is baked in. But having said that, it comes out in the political story in right now, Democrats being less likely to say that they'll definitely vote. And a lot of Joe Biden's numbers are in part lower because of that. His campaign has work to do to drive up that motivation, and he's not doing as well as he did in 2020 with some key Democratic groups. I would add this, though, Margaret, and I think it's important. Joe Biden is trailing Donald Trump when we ask who has a vision for the country. And that speaks across party lines in many ways. And what I think is important there is that these are uncertain times in the minds of many voters. When people see uncertainty, even if they don't rate things right now as good, and they don't, they want a roadmap. They want to know where things are going. And that's a key gap that I'm going to watch over the next few months.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a huge deal. Okay, especially the part about who's definitely going to vote in the 2024 election. That's what I try to tell you guys. It's going to come down to whether or not the far left Democrat base, are they motivated to vote for Joe Biden? Okay, and the only thing that Democrats have to motivate Democrats to come out and vote for Joe Biden is the whole Roe v. Wade thing. But outside of that, there is no motivation, right? So if they sit at home, the election's over, right? The election's over if they sit at home. And right now, it seems like they will sit home, if you believe the polls. Now, I'm not sure exactly how accurate the general election polls are, but we know that the primary polls, at least the GOP primary polls, have been pretty accurate. So if the general election polls are as accurate as the primary polls, it is looking really, really, really bad for Joe Biden going into the 2024 election. And I think it's going to get worse. I think Trump is going to continue to expand his lead. The more attacks that he takes from the mainstream liberal media, it's just not working. Trump is really showing that he is Teflon. And again, part of the reason why is because people know that objectively we were in a much better place under Trump than we are under Joe Biden right now. And I don't think that much is going to change between now and the election. But hey, let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.